Alrighty, so you're gonna have to put up with my nasally voice here today. I've got some kind of crud, but anyway, I digress. I wanted to just talk to everybody today a little bit about the salt marsh meadows of South Carolina. So this is something that not a lot of people know about, not a lot of people talk about, but here on, these higher elevation, bordering brackish marshes in the tidal zone of South Carolina, we do actually have salt meadows that crop up here and there. And there's just a few plants that can really tolerate, the brutality of the salt marsh. And I just wanted to spotlight them a bit. This is one of my favorites, which is perennial salt marsh aster, Symphytrichum tenuifolium, which just has, tenuifoliums is very tenuous, very thread-like leaves. It's perennial, comes back year after year. There are the leaves down there. And let me set this over there. That's my spider stick. There are the leaves down there. It's a basal rosette just right here growing out of high salt marsh. So this little linear feature you see right here is an old berm, which is why this is able to grow here, is because this is just ever so slightly about 3 to 4 inches higher than the rest of this marsh. So this is able to persist here because it doesn't quite get as regular tidal influence as this. And this is fairly saline water. This is in the 20s. So this is cooking. This is good stuff. Another one I wanted to talk about was Carolina sea lavender, which I really love. It's a very diminutive flower. It's very hard to, really showcase its beauty, but it's plumb pretty. All right. I forget the Latin. I think it's like Limnomium carolinianum or something. Anyway, it's doobly-dood. But these are two of the actual flowering plants that grow out here in the marsh. This is early October, so we're not going to see like marsh pinks, which kind of grow on the brackish water line. Those are more of a May species, although they do sometimes peter into October. I just saw some, 2 weeks ago, still blooming. So they're still out there. Another one, no, that's not it. Another one that you sometimes see, not in this kind of really saline salt meadow, is annual salt marsh aster, which is very different from this. It actually looks a lot like an erigeron, like a fleabane. It's got very tiny little white flowers on it. And it kind of grows, and it's more of a large bushy thing. Like, it looks a lot like horseweed. Not a lot like any of the other Symphytrichums that you might be used to seeing in the southeast. And growing alongside all of this, we also have saltgrass, Distichulus spicata. And so that stuff, pretty much you see that anywhere you see this kind of, like, I would call this these salt marsh meadows, they're still salt marsh, but these are the king tide marsh. This is where you only get tidal influence on the highest of tides. It stays wet, stays saturated, but you're not getting salt all the time. So the plants are able to adapt and fill in a different niche. More often than not, you see this as a fringe growing on the upland as I'm making my way over there to show you. But I just wanted to point out right here, this is a bed of just saltgrass. Spartina. This is Spartina. And then this is the short form Spartina, which is actually genetically isolated from the tall form Spartina, which I'll try and point out some of that if I see it. Tall form Spartina likes to grow on the river channels where the soil is highly oxygenated and very nutritious. It gets that sediment input from every single tide, and it's got fiddler crabs and snapper shrimp and all those other coastal invertebrates bioturbating the soil, really putting that oxygen in there, really has that high nutrient load. That's where you see the tall form Spartina. It's stuff that gets up 7 foot tall. But the short form Spartina out here is what grows in these flats, these back swales, and it's able to deal with the anoxic conditions and the higher salinity better. It's able to tolerate the consistent stress. You can get tall form stuff to grow here, and you can get short form stuff to grow there. But the short form stuff you put out there doesn't grow as vigorously, and the tall form stuff here grows vigorously and then hits a stressful situation and then it dies. So this is the tortoise and that stuff's the hare. Very interesting. They bloom at different times. They are almost entirely genetically isolated at this point, but they haven't quite speciated. Very cool, interesting thing. I'll put some of the ongoing research happening right now into this stuff up here on the screen. Really fascinating read. But anyway, I digress. This is saltgrass meadow. Nothing but saltgrass in here. A little bit of sea lavender. All right, so this is usually where you see the salt meadow come in. You see, you got that, just a little bit of spartina in here, whole lot of saltgrass, and then you roll on in here, and you've got perennial glasswort down here, Sarcoconia perennis, sprinkled throughout, and of course, sea oxeye daisy down in here, Berichia frutescens, which blooms in June. But then you got your salt marsh asters, you got your Carolina sea lavender, all just intermixed, moving uphill, forming this fringe meadow. And as you get to the higher elevations, let me go find a better berm somewhere on the other side of this property to show you. So I don't really know the exact difference in habitat requirements that allows saltgrass to grow but not black needle rush, because there's the needle rush meadow right there, and I'm not walking through that because it hurts. And here's the saltgrass meadow, and you can see the coon trails running through here. They love their fiddler crabs. I think the muckier soil promotes the saltgrass more than the needle rush. The needle rush I really think needs sand, because generally when you get into a needle rush stand, it's pretty much a sandy substrate underneath, but it could also just be the fact that the needle rush filters a lot of that out. You know, you don't get big rack floats going into a needle rush thicket. Yeah, here's some of that spartina blooming. So here's the short form blooming here in early October, when a lot of the tall form has already tasseled out in September. Oh, and for the record, I'm not calling it Sporobolus. Those dirty Europeans violated the botanical code and nomenclature just so that they didn't have to call all of their Sporobolus Spartina. So they can go pound sand. I'm still going to call it Spartina, and until they're the ones who made up the rules, and then they violated the rules because they got inconvenient for them. Typical Europeans. Anyway, here we're getting into a much nicer example of this salt marsh meadow. Oh yeah. And a classic butterfly you see out here taking advantage of these is salt marsh skippers, aptly named. These little, I don't know if I can get one into focus, but these little tan jobbers flying around. They are very well adapted to the salt marsh. And see them a lot this time of year. See them a lot on frog fruit. See them a lot on salt marsh aster and all that. But just look at that. Big old salt meadow. And this is not Spartina patens. This is not salt meadow cordgrass. This is all salt grass out here. And this is all short form Spartina. And that's all black needle rush. So you can see this interesting stratification. So I think this is kind of the brackish line, because that's upland and that's downstream. So it must be that there is fresh water coming down this way, which is holding back the slug of salt water just enough that this is brackish enough for the saltgrass to hold on and keep out a lot of the Spartina and needle rush. Spartina actually grows really well in fresh water. It just can't compete. It's really, hyper efficient at dealing with salt, but it wastes a lot of, it's really too specialized to compete with anything in freshwater. So you can grow it in freshwater, like in a greenhouse setting, just fine. But you put it out in the field and it can't compete with everything else. So yeah, this is it's a very interesting ecosystem that few people see. Everyone talks about salt marsh, but they really only think about the low marsh. They don't think about, these marsh meadows. But this is the stuff that, a lot of our more terrestrial estuarine species rely upon. Things like rails and fiddler crabs, whimbrels, and that kind of stuff. So here's the other side of that berm we were looking at originally, and I see some of the other stuff I wanted to talk about. Cool. Here is a species of sedge that you find growing out here in the salt meadow. This is Fimbrostylus, or marsh fimbri, and I forget the specific epithet, I'll doobly do it right here. But this stuff, super common out here on the marsh fringes, not in the marsh itself. God, just look at those tassels. Look at that. Just gorgeous. But anywho, this stuff is super common on the marsh fringes. You know, right where you get to the like extreme tide line where it only sees, you know, tidal influence a few times a year, you find a lot of fimbri. And everyone thinks it's a grass, but it's actually a sedge. Well, I say the casual observer, it's fairly obvious to a botanist, but you know, very grassy looking foliage, but it is a sedge, it's got edge. And here's another one I want to mention. This is seashore dropseed. This is a sporobolus, not Spartina, sporobolus, down here. And so this grows kind of in sandy barrens in a similar kind of elevation to fimbri. When you're in these really drier, sandy, sodic soils that don't get regular influence, you know, not the kind of stuff that the saltgrass likes, but more kind of these, you know, these eroded berms and that kind of stuff, or like sand flats in upland areas that are converting into salt marsh because sea level rise is happening. Whatever you think is causing it is irrelevant. It's happening. I'm watching it in front of my very eyes. I have plats that tell me where the marshes are on properties, and I'm walking on them today 50 years later, and it is not there. It is 6 inches above where it was. So that's happening. Anyway, that's a digression, but this is seashore dropseed. It actually makes a pretty good turf grass. Not that I like turf grass, but it's a native turf grass in sodic, sandy, tidally influenced areas, and it looks fairly similar to Bermuda as well. So really, if you're one of those people who likes lawns for some reason, it's a good option. And of course, a little bit of marsh elder to round things out. But just look at these tassels. Just look at that. Just gorgeous. Short form Spartina. Smooth cordgrass. Oh, look at that shed. Oh boy. What is that? That's nearly a 6 point. That's an inch. That technically might be a 6 point single antler. Nifty. Is definitely dense. You know, it's got some mass to it. Cool beans. Put that in the pile. So actually that leads to another fun fact I wanted to talk about. So a lot of places, rodents will just destroy antlers the second they hit the ground. They're just chewed up, gnawed, and gone. This sucker's been laying here since last year, and as you can see, it has had just a few little nibbles here and there. And that's because, well, we're in a salt marsh. And you know what the two most highly concentrated nutrients are here in the salt marsh sediment? Calcium and phosphorus. You know what makes up bone? Calcium and phosphorus, and carbon and other stuff. But in a lot of places, calcium and phosphorus are highly limiting to both plant and animal growth. Down here on the coast, we have calcium and phosphorus everywhere. It's nitrogen and potassium that are limiting, as well as sulfur in some soils. So rodents actually don't touch sheds practically at all. It's more so mollusks a lot of times. And that's really only in terrestrial environments. Here on the extreme coast, you just find deer sheds out here on hammock islands like this all the time, because deer like it out here, because things don't like to bother them on hammock islands because they get their little feetsies all muddy trying to chase after them, including people. So you'll just find deer sheds out here in practically perfect condition. So I've got a whole pile of these at home. Also, I promised I would show you guys tall form Spartina, but I don't think I'm going to find any out here. I was just looking in the gutter over here, and it looks to just kind of be a mismatch of whatever happened to establish. So also switchgrass, which is what I'm clambering through right now. This stuff, fairly salt tolerant. So this stuff does well in a lot of different ecosystems, but it does really well in these sort of brackish swales on hammock islands and the like. Wouldn't have guessed it, but that it does. Actually, here looks like a patch of tall-form Spartina that's been pushed back in here. It's either that or it's a really well-to-do patch of short-form Spartina. But you can see I'm 6 foot, and it's taller than I am, so that's about 6.5 foot tall. And this Spartina over here is not that out there. So it may or may not be, but let me try and find a better example. But you know, it's really distinct when you see the two side by side. And I always thought it was just environmental, but turns out it's genetic. So this kind of stratification only happens when there is a distinct advantage to one lifestyle or the other, because you know all the Spartina seeds float and they get moved around with the tides and they get deposited. So both of these growth forms get a fair shot at growing in both eco environments. So the fact that one is outcompeting the other in both environments shows that they are in the process of speciating, and soon will be separate species. I hope I can get through this little ditch here without soaking my snake boots. Too bad. Snake boots aren't waterproof, but they are a hell of a lot more water resistant than my leather boots with holes in them. Whoop. Goopy. On another aside, here's another species you find in very much the same sort of habitat. This is southern seaside goldenrod. Now, this just got split recently into northern and southern. So southern is what's found where I'm at here in South Carolina. And so this is now Solidago mexicana. Solidago sempervirens is now found only in the northern Atlantic. But this is an evergreen goldenrod that is salt tolerant. And there its evergreen leaves. And so it exists most of the year as a rosette. Like this little clump of leaves down here. Just a couple leaves sticking up out of the ground. Oftentimes they turn very red if they're in bright sunlight. But these are relied heavily upon by migrating monarchs this time of year in early October. I should show some baccaris too if I can find some. I surprisingly haven't seen any yet today, but I'm sure I'll see some later. All right, so here we are at another site with a fairly banal view. Nothing, you know, worth seeing out here. It's just a fella's old beer drinking spot, not mine, regrettably. But anywho, this is another site. If you don't think sea level rise is happening, this used to be lawn, and now it's sea oxeye daisy and seashore dropseed. But anyway, I digress. So now I can finally show you tall form Spartina. That stuff. Very different than the short form growing out here. I don't even know if this is short form. I can't quite tell. Ooh, is that a Merlin? I think it is. I know you can't see that, but that's a Merlin right there in the middle of the screen. Not the wizard, the bird. But anywho, you can see short stuff, not so short stuff. You can really see the difference over there and that guy. Let me see if I can wriggle closer to one. The problem with the tall form stuff is that it, you know, grows in bluff mud. And when you're in one of these old incised Pleistocene creek beds, that stuff can be that high. So I ain't walking out there. But this looks like hard marsh, so I might be able to get close enough over here. There we go. Yeah, this is what I'm talking about. This is tall form Spartina. So here I am. It's about the same height as me. So this is about a 6 foot stand of grass, just grown in mud. But as you can see, this is far more aerated, nutritious bluff mud over here on account of all the fiddler crabs, snapper shrimp, and everything just working this stuff. And as well as, you know, this being within the average high tide line, when this creek fills up at high tide, and we're still incoming right now, this will come over, wash over this, and just place a fine layer of sediment right here. So every single day, this gets refreshed on nutrition, all the water drains out, gets re-aerated by the invertebrates down there in the soil. So apart from the horrid salinity, this plant has everything it needs. It's being baked all day in the blistering South Carolina sun. It's got all the nutrients it could ever want, and it's got all the air and all the water it could ever need. It just has to try not to be mummified in the process. So that's the big difference between tall form Spartina and the more short form Spartina. Is this one is better adapted to take advantage of all the amenities of this highly productive ecosystem, whereas that one is more so aimed at stability and making a lasting colony in the worst conditions over here in this hard marsh, which doesn't always get the same tidal influence, and when it does, the water sits and it doesn't drain out. So when the water sits, it then evaporates, and when it evaporates, it concentrates the salt. So the salinity in here can actually be higher than ocean water, which is really where this stuff shines, is that it's able to really tolerate that salinity and just deal with the harsh environments. But anyway, now that I've showed you that, I can finally move on to something else. And right on cue as well, here is some Baccharis just starting to bloom. And common buckeye, showcasing its value as a pollinator plant. So this is Baccharis helemifolia, and this is a incredibly valuable pollinator plant here in these salt marsh scrub meadows, because it is relied upon substantially by migrating monarchs heading back to Mexico, as well as the more localized populations that are moving to the South Carolina barrier islands and those moving down to peninsular Florida. So this is a member of the aster family, Asteraceae. So this is not a tree. This is a sunflower family member. So very cool, very interesting, very important pollinator plant down here. Grows practically everywhere, likes wet feet, can tolerate poor, droughty soils, high salinity. Really robust plant, except for its wood. It's not very robust there. It's kind of brittle, falls apart, but a lot of ecological value. Anyway, I just wanted to talk about some salt marsh meadows down here on Edisto Island, because I really love this ecosystem this time of year. You know, it's like in the 70s out right now, and the sun just finally came over the tree line, so I'm sure it won't stay like that forever, but nice breeze, terrible for the audio, great for my skin. It's beautiful out here this time of year. But anyway, I digress. If you like this kind of stuff, consider giving the video a like, comment, tell me your favorite salt-influenced ecosystem in the Georgia Bight. And if you want to see more content like this, you got to subscribe, so smash the gray button down there. Until next time, I'm out.